Now, Investree Philippines, a joint venture between Philinvest Development Corp and Investree Singapore, has been given the green light by the SEC to operate the country's first crowdfunding platform. We're glad Chuan Lim, CEO and co-founder of Investree Philippines, can join us this morning live. Good morning, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Mimi. Good morning to everyone.
Good morning. So Investree is a peer-to-peer lending program. You connect MSMEs to individuals who can bankroll part of the operations, either through purchase order or inventory financing. How does the shift from that, and there are several of you already doing that sort of PO financing, inventory financing, into a crowdfunding platform change the business model? How does this crowdfunding platform, how does it work then? Is it, equity or more like debt capital you're raising?
And that's a good question. So Investree as a platform matches SMEs that need capital with institutional investors as opposed to retail individual investors. So what we do is we perform the function of a matchmaker. We administer the loan. We do the verification of the cash flow repayment, so on and so forth. And in return, we charge a fee to our borrowers as well as the investors on our platform.
Okay, so just to clarify, this crowdfunding platform is not open to low net worth, small-time individuals who may want to put in some money here and there for startups. No.
Not at this point of time. We are targeting qualified buyers as defined by the SEC. These would include institutions like banks and funds.
Okay.
We will be potentially opening up to retail sometime later in the future when the asset class is more established.
Okay, and this would only be for, let's start with the side of those who are raising the funds. Will this be for businesses, SMEs only, or do you also allow crowdfunding for donations or for advocacies, other campaigns?
Currently, Investree is only doing debt-based crowdfunding, targeting productive loans in the MSME space. So we don't envisage to be touching consumers at this point.
And when do you plan to open this to retail investors?
We have to work very closely with our SEC regulators to determine when's the suitable time. For example, in Thailand and Indonesia, where we have our base of operations, we've started with retail investors day one, and we've only moved on to institutions 3 years down the road. Here in the Philippines, we believe there's a strong demand from institutional investors that can fund the financing for SMEs that we will be looking to help originate loans.
So if you simply connect the MSMEs to the banks, aren't you essentially just serving as the middleman? Because the SMEs can actually go directly to the banks.
Correct. You hit the nail on the head. So maybe I can just explain the kind of like the environment. Banks would love to lend to SMEs. They typically find it difficult to do so because of various restrictions. For example, it's difficult to score an SME in the provinces. You need to open a branch. You need to set aside a high degree of capital. You need to hire people. As such, while banks would love to lend to this space, they find it difficult to do so. And this is where we try to come in to bridge the gap. So what we do is we work with various ecosystem partners. In this case, we are our Philinvest partners to look at the supply chain team within their ecosystem. We do the hard job of verifying, checking the track record of some of our issuers, borrowers, SMEs, and we then offer these loans to our institutional partners. What this essentially does is shaves down the effort and time taken as well as the capital required for some of these institutions to make the loans. We make it easier, right? You're totally right to say we are the middleman.
And the rates that you will offer the MSMEs, will this be the same rates as the bank?
Because the banks are not really lending so much to the SMEs, what we have worked with our SEC regulator is to cap it below the unsecured credit card rates. So in our case, our monthly rates will be anything from 1% to 3%.
Okay, that's pretty competitive. You mentioned earlier your Philippine partner, the Philinvest Group. Aside from studying the supply chain, will the Philinvest Group play any active role operationally? Perhaps, it has a banking arm, East West Bank. Will it be a partner of some sorts?
Firstly, Philinvest is our JV partner, right? So what they'll be doing is providing local support and knowledge, best practices, and more importantly, they'll be providing us the initial ecosystem for Investree to start. I mentioned earlier their supply chain team within the Philinvest group. Now, with regards to East West Bank, they are our natural banking partner, being part of the Philinvest group. We are working very closely with them to develop banking services, for example, trustee services, cash management services, so that future institutional investors will have their interests protected.
Okay. You mentioned earlier that Investree started in Indonesia back in 2015, set up shop in Thailand 2019, and there from day one, you started with the retail investors and moved to the institutional investors. Why did you do it the other way around here in the Philippines and started with the insties before you go into retail down the line?
That's a very interesting question, maybe. So what we believe is after 5 years of experience, right, we believe that institutional investors, in our experience, tend to come in with larger investment sizes. We believe that this larger investment check sizes will allow our issuers, our SME finance borrowers to actually get capital faster. The experience with retail borrowers is there needs to be a fair bit of education involved, and the check sizes tend to be smaller, right? So for the interest of our target SME groups, we believe that the trade-off with faster, bigger check sizes will offset the potential for retail investors. But we are still open to the idea of retail investments maybe going forward, maybe a few years down the road.
In your experience in Indonesia and Thailand with your retail investors, could you give us an idea of the demographics, who were investing in these startups, what sort of businesses, causes or campaigns were they gravitating towards?
Sure. The demographics of the retail investors there is quite interesting. So we have a very tech-savvy Southeast Asian country in Indonesia where mobile penetration rate is extremely high. So we have youngish people, like maybe the average age of our retail investors are about 35 years old. Relatively evenly split between male and female, and most of them use investments through their mobile devices, right? So it's a very young demographic. And perhaps just to clarify, right, we don't just lend to startups. We have startup borrowers, but a lot of our borrowers in Indonesia actually establish, small, medium companies. So it's not just startups.
The future looks great and exciting once that happens here in the Philippines as well. I'm sure a lot of the low net worth individuals here are looking, to dip their toes into some investments, supporting some of these MSMEs. Final question, how big do you see the peer-to-peer lending market in the Philippines to be? I understand in Indonesia, for example, that market grew, 3 times from 2018 to 2019, hitting nearly $5 billion. What's the potential here in the Philippines?
Well, the potential for Philippines is also very large, right? Investree is the first crowdfunding license to be awarded the license by SEC. According to an IFC 2017 report about the credit gap for MSMEs in Philippines, this number was reported to be approximately $200 billion US, right? Now, they've claimed that only 6% of this credit gap has been met by the financial institutions here. As such, we think that the credit gap is approximately $188 billion US in 2017. Now, these numbers could have changed somewhat, but if we just looked at this is the credit gap where I think the players will be trying to address. So it's pretty large.
Just one final question. You mentioned that you're the middleman between the banks and the MSMEs. Do you also take on some of the risk should those loans default?
That's a good question, right? So in Indonesia, we have what we call SPV lending, right? So what we've done is we've co-invested with some of our offshore institutional investors in some of the loans. So for example, in Philippines, we'll probably be looking to fund that as well. So we'll be taking on skin in the game with some of our institutional partners.
Okay. On that note, thank you very much, Chuan Lim, for joining us all the way from Singapore. Good luck.